Some of the most fascinating aspects of the Hispano culture in northern New Mexico is the fact that they have this sense of being orphaned. I call this orphanness of northern New Mexico. It is reflected in the literature of northern New Mexico. We always believe that we have been abandoned. First, we were abandoned by Spain, who didn't want us. We were abandoned by Mexico. We were not wanted by the United States of America. And suddenly, when we try to make a stand in the Chicano culture, the United States again says no. So there's this concept of rejection, bam, 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 across generations. And before that time, when you look at the languages, within recorded time, we have gone from a Tiwa-speaking people to a Spanish-speaking people to an Anglo-speaking people, and now we are speaking languages which are neither nor. I have started a whole new series in the newspapers called Habla Usted Spanglish, and people kind of laugh when I say there are no rules for Spanglish, and I said, oh yes, there are rules for Spanglish. Spanglish is a melding of two different things. It is a melding of 20th century English coupled with 16th century Spanish of northern New Mexico. So just to understand Spanglish, you have to know the rules of both just to understand the language which is neither nor. For example, if I were to say, Mother, bring me my pink sweater in Spanglish, which is something that we do often, we'd say, Mother, tráeme mi sweater pink. Tráeme mi sweater pink? Why didn't I say, Mother, tráeme mi pink sweater? And the reason is because I am still speaking Spanish, thinking in Spanish, but thinking in English. Where the adjective comes after the noun that it is describing, I would use it in Spanish, mi suéter color rosa, mi sweater pink, instead of mi pink sweater. Do you see how that works? You want another tongue-in-cheek example? Let me tell you about the time that I went to Santa Fe. I was in Santa Fe and I was listening to some people speak. These were Anglo speakers now. And the Anglo speaker says, where is Robert? And they said, Robert, well, he's out on the portal, sitting on the banco. And people said, he said portal and banco. He must be completely bilingual. Now let's shift this anecdote around. Supposing that the tale were being told in Spanish, and there were two Hispanos at the opera. Then the Hispanos would say, ¿Dónde está Roberto? The other would answer, Roberto está en el porch sentado en el bench. Okay, now because he said porch and bench, people would begin to giggle and laugh. And I say, wait a minute, why are you giggling at the second one but not at the first one? And the reason is over here because Spanish, if it incorporates words of English into it, is thought to be lowbrow or inferior Spanish. Whereas English, being the greater overriding national language, as they are trying to make it right now, would, if it would incorporated Spanish into it, would be superior Spanish. So one, by incorporating another language, would be aggrandized, the other one would be diminished. All of these things tend to be, we do this automatically without thinking about it, but we have to be made consciously, and the operative word here is consciously aware of the fact that it does happen. And these things, even if they are said just as passing comments in the classroom, touch deeply the soul of that student who is a member of that culture. So keep that in mind as professors when you are thinking of the students from northern New Mexico especially, who come into your classroom and say, well, that's not the way I remember. It's not correct to say, well, you're wrong. Instead, say, tell me about your culture, and then I'll tell you about mine. We'll both grow from it. The geographical nature of languages is fascinating, and again, let me talk about it from a linguistic point of view. As a linguist, I would say that there are patterns of language which tend to overlap with each other. The million-dollar word for this is called an isogloss. An isogloss is just a fancy way of saying languages are overlapping. But the same word that may be used, in New Mexico English vocabulary, a pig will always be a pig. But in Spanish, depending on where you happen to be, that pig will have 4 different terms. In northern New Mexico, he could be called a cochino. In Santa Fe, he would be called a cerdo. In Las Cruces, he might be called a marrano. So different ways of looking at the same animal. Or even more wonderful example, the word turkey. Let's look at the word turkey. In Taos, the turkey would be called a ganso, which literally means a goose. But you have to remember that the first settlers in the New World had never seen this New World fowl bird. So they thought, well, it must be a goose like the ones we had back in Spain. So even today, in modern day Taos Spanish, a goose, rather, a turkey is still called a ganso. Santa Fe, it is called a pavo, which is more akin to the Latin. In Las Cruces, it would be called a huijolote, which is from the Aztec. Whereas if I go to the western part of New Mexico, to the Silver City area, it would be called a cocono, totally different. That's a Taino word. And if I go to Hispaniola, they would have probably used the English word turkey and called it un torque. So is it a torque? Is it a ganso? Is it a huijolote? Is it a cocono? Or is it a what have you? Again, this is what I mean by isoglossic cultures, when you have different ways of looking at the same term, but the degree that you assign to the word is just as different. The word helado in Spanish just means frozen in northern New Mexico. Frozen water would be agua helada, whereas if I ask for agua helada in Las Cruces, they say just iced water, not frozen water, but just ice water. It's the same concept, but the degree is a little bit different. Let's talk about generational culture now. If we talk about even if you are not speaking a foreign language, the way in which we speak varies constantly throughout the course of a day. The way that I would talk to a child would be vastly different from the way I would talk to my parents. My parents would be a little bit more respectful, with the child a little bit more intimate, more baby talk, what we would call motherese. And then if I were to take it to the next generation, to grandparents, it would be even much more formal, and to great-grandparents, even much more formal than that. And then the surprising thing that happens in Hispano culture is the following. We tend to think of our concept of God, however we want to define God, as being something too powerful, too great for any of us to comprehend. So in Hispano-Latino culture, you tend to make God into a little statue and put it in a quarter and talk to it. And then if he doesn't do what you want him to do, then you turn him to the quarter, kind of like in Time Out. And then you turn him back in and put tacos in front of him to reward him when he does good. Or you could take the same St. Anthony statue and put him in a chest of drawers and say, until I get a husband or a wife, you're not moving from there. And it's kind of fun. It's this intimacy that we have with the divine within ourselves. And so we tend to pray to God in a very intimate way, much more than we would use the same intimacy with our own grandparents, parents, or even children. It's the same intimacy that we might use with our animals way down here. In Spanish, this would be the difference between usted and tú. Tú is very, very informal, intimate. Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo, you are in heaven. See, in English, we used to have that at one time when we used to say thee and thou. In English now, it's just you, except in other parts of the United States where it's y'all or you'n or yous guys, etc. But you just tend to use you as both singular and plural at the same time. So what I am saying over here, in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, is that even if you don't speak foreign languages, you have to recognize that there is generational speech. You want me to take it even further? Let's talk about sexist speech. Do men and women think differently? Are men really from Mars and women from Venus? I tell you that they are. For example, the man comes home and he calls his girlfriend, and she's yelling and complaining. She's saying, "You haven't talked to me in 4 days." And he'll take the same concept and say, "I just talked to you 4 days ago." Both of them are correct, both of them are accurate, but the perceptions between one and the other, do you see, are vastly different. So these are all things that we have to consider. We in northern New Mexico are often teased by the people of southern New Mexico because they say that we have a sing-songy way of speaking. It's not that our language is inaccurate. It's just that we are thinking in Spanish and speaking in English. So that if I were not using my textbook voice, I would probably sound something more like this. Hey, I was going to town, and I fell down, and I skinned my knees. Now, look at that. Notice that my voice would go up at the end of every sentence. I was going to town, and I fell down, and I crossed, and I skinned my knees. Okay, now this to me would be very, very accurate because it is not at all an exaggeration. It just means that I am using my Spanish intonation with English. There's nothing wrong with the English. Let me tell you a story. One day I was with a bunch of students over in Barcelona, Spain, and a man was listening to us very carefully. And then he came to us and he said, "Excuse me, are you guys from northern New Mexico?" And my students turned to him and said, how can you tell?" And he started laughing and he said, "Just by the way you said it." So what that brings to mind is this: it's not the what of speech, but the how of speech that sometimes is very important in analyzing first generation Hispano students, especially at the university level. The how, not the what. The subject matter can be taken care of by any textbook, but the how, that's where the teacher enters, and that's where the validity of the teaching experience also enters into it, and the willingness of that professor to be trained or to at least be open to a different way of looking at the same problem or at the same formula. The reason that people should care about this difference in cultural identity is because even among themselves, Latinos, Hispanos, do not relate totally to each other as to having the same cultural base. Oh, there are certain icons that we have that are universal to the Latino culture, such as the Lady of Guadalupe, for example, that would be recognized anywhere in the world, regardless of where you happen to be. But the truth of the matter is, food is different, culture is different, a song is different, rituals are different, and all of these things are part of the home culture that are brought to university culture later on, and is something that need to be recognized by the professors in order for them to be able to reach out a little bit better to that student. This is a lot of work. Is it worth the effort? And the reason is yes. The answer would be yes, it is worth the effort. It is worth the effort given time, and only time will tell. It is worth the effort because if we're going to move forward as an institution, as a scholastic unit, we have to remember that before we can move forward anywhere, healing must take place. What is this healing that I'm talking about? And the healing would be this. We have to remember that New Mexico has been turned down for statehood for many, many years for various reasons. Very few people remember that New Mexico applied for statehood as early as 1848, but we were denied statehood until 1912. 64 times we had to apply for statehood, and 64 times we were denied. Now, already this tells us that we are not trusted by the greater American nation, at least in the minds of the tribal culture. Why not? Well, maybe for starters because our language is different. Not only is it Spanish, but it's archaic Spanish in many cases. For example, if I had to say, I am very ugly, I would say in modern day textbook Spanish, yo soy muy feo. Yo soy muy feo, not a problem. But if I were to use it, the same Spanish as it is used in certain corners of New Mexico, I would say, yo sego murre de fiero. Do you see? It is almost a Vulgate Latin. It's a transitional language that we are using. So that may be one of the reasons why we feel alienated. Secondly, because the culture, the religious back culture of New Mexico is Catholic, and not just Catholic, medieval Catholic, whereas the East tended to be Protestant on that side of the Mississippi River where all the publishing houses were. Also, if New Mexico had been allowed to join the Union in 1862, probably we would have sided with the slave states rather than with the free states, and thus upset the equal balance. You want another reason? I can tell you that probably because we were needed only as a stepping stone to the gold rush in California of 1849 and Manifest Destiny. Reason number 6, I could probably say that because, in all fairness to the United States, we did not have the necessary male population, which were the only ones, they were the only ones who could vote at that time. But all of these reasons, historically speaking, alienated this segment of society from the greater American nation. And so when we speak about going forward and about, is it worth it? I say, yes, it is. But you have to heal from a lot of unspoken wounds. And how do we do this? By making professors and students aware of the fact that we do share this common history. I often think of a quote by Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State, who said something which has always struck me as a great truth. She said, we may all come from a different past. We may all have had a different past, but we all certainly share the same future. And that is important. Is it worth it? Absolutely. It'll take some time. It'll take a lot of healing, but in the end, yes, we will see the results.